Well, Michael here. This is the
bike check
and story of my performance clunker. My MVP, both minimum viable product and most valuable player, ATB. Trilliums are blooming here in Montreal, but before we get to current days, I'm going to start us off with a dramatization of a couple of months ago.
rolling.
It's so sunny out. I don't want to work on that video about my winter bike. I want to convert my other winter bike to non-winter mode and finally set up the 3-speed shifter on it, and mostly just ride the bike. But I had really planned on making the bike check videos in order of when the bikes entered my life. But I really want to fix up that bike and ride it. If only there was a sign from the skies above. Ooh, new video. Fix the bike, ride the bike. Yes, Gary, yes.
There's nothing worse than a bike that's just in parts, I think, or a bike that's basically built but isn't rideable. Kind of, bugs me a little bit. I don't know if you guys have that as well.
Fix the bike, ride the bike. Yes, Gary, yes. Fix the bike, ride the bike. Yes, Gary, yes. That's what I'm gonna go do. Wait. What the? Where's my key? Oh, that time I slipped on black ice a couple of weeks ago. I think I may have lost the key when my keyring got all bent. Cut the lock. Fix the bike. Ride the bike. Cut the lock. Fix the bike. Ride the bike. And so I cut the lock in a rather inefficient way. I probably should have plugged a couple of long extension cords together to run power from my apartment and use the angle grinder from the bike co-op. But I knew my Jackery battery backup couldn't support the angle grinder, yet could power my Dremel. So I broke about 7 or 8 cut-off blades to eventually cut all the way through the U-lock.
And cut.
And that's how we got to the 2025 edits of this bike. But now I'm going to head back to the beginning of this bicycle. And on my way there, I'll briefly mention the background music, which is a recording labeled Sandro Jam without Sandro, with a clunk tone of Volcas. It's using a saved track I had made with my friend Sandro on my Novation Circuit Groovebox style synth, but then played back through a setup that I once referred to as my mega setup, where I had a number of synths all set up together in a very large flight case, ready to run through effects, and ready to loop any instrument I wanted. So with this recording, the tunes Sandro had made are being doubled or tripled up through various Korg Volca synths, which are each about the size of a VHS tape. And then I'm riffing on it like a wild man. Much like that, this bicycle started off as one thing, apparently a 2011 Norco Rio Vista, but then someone added a front side pull caliper brake and either busted the crankset or just wanted something to go faster, because the person I bought this from had changed the crankset and the chainring to a 52 tooth. And then I started riffing on it like a wild man. I had just gotten into clunkers a little while before buying this. I had my secondhand Walmart Columbia Rambler disc brake clunker turned e-bike by then. I had my crappy Supercycle clunker by then, and I think I had my 1940s CCM clunker by then. So I had no shortage of curved top tube frames in my life, and I was just planning on clunking this old beach cruiser and selling it. Before picking it up, I asked the seller if it was in rideable condition, and he assured me it was. But on my way home, I ended up removing the chain guard because it kept getting caught since it was only being held on by one of its 2 bolts. And beyond that, it wasn't running super great. But winter arrived right after I bought this, and my plans immediately switched from flipping it to wanting to keep it for myself as a winter bike, since it was an aluminum frame and it had full fenders. Not in great shape, but functional for the season, and I was enjoying its relaxed geometry, which also makes it easier to put a foot down, which is sometimes needed in winter. The stem came from some Kona bike that I found in the garbage. I had some black Velo Orange Klunker bars, which I had planned on using for my aforementioned e-bike, but that bike needed the pop of chrome, so I ended up buying a second set of those handlebars in silver. I think the chrome ones would likely stand up to winter conditions a bit better than the black, so the black ones have a few spots of surface rust on them, which I've been touching up with a bit of blue and teal nail polish. I swapped the brake lever over to the right side, and still haven't shortened the cable or changed the brake pads or anything. And I stuck some Moose Racing motorbike grips on it, and I tried riding it with Schwalbe Marathon Winter Plus tires for one ride and hated the tires. For one thing, they wouldn't sit right on the rims without a kick in it, but regardless, they just felt slow to me. I ordered some CX Pro 26-inch tires, and even though I knew they were fairly skinny, I didn't realize just how much that would change the handling of the bike, but it sure does. Bike Farmer has since made a video about how much he hates the 1.5-inch slick 26-inch tires on bikes that weren't meant for that geometry, and these are even skinnier than that. Pedal strikes were definitely possible, which just encouraged me to keep from leaning over too much, which is a good idea for winter cycling anyway. So I just commuted like that for a few months. Those tires both rode goofy and looked goofy, especially with the big fenders. Then as soon as spring came, I happily switched the tires to Schwalbe Blackjack tires, which was an improvement for sure, though they're not my favorite. I find the center treads end up feeling like a squishy fin. I like Rapid Robs much more, though I've never tried those on this bike. Then a couple of months later, I took the fenders off and I removed the Norco Performance Bicycles head badge, and I stuck a head badge that I made on out of craft foam, created thanks to my niece asking me to craft with her. And I painted the bike. I've mentioned this technique in past videos, but it consists of spraying a base coat, waiting for it to dry, spraying water droplets, then spraying the main color coat, and wiping when the paint is mostly dried to reveal the base coat. And then in the case of this bike, adding a clear coat afterwards. I upgraded the wheels to a nicer set that I got on Marketplace. The rear wheel is a Sturmey-Archer 3-speed with coaster brake, aka a tri-coaster. Except that I didn't have the hardware around to set it up, so for the time being it remained in effect as a single speed. Then when winter came around last year, I decided to try one of the Marathon winter tires on the front with a wider CX Comp tire on the back. No pedal strikes, no kick in the tire, enough grip, but it didn't feel too sluggish, nor like I was riding a zipper. And then I got that lock off. I swapped out a beat-up chainring for this chainring and bash guard. I decided to try out one of these anti-rust chains, which I assume are just coated with something related to Teflon, but if anyone knows, let me know. And I put on the chunkiest pair of mismatched tires from the bike co-op, a big Kenda in the back and a bigger CST in the front. And I finally got the 3-speed shifter set up. The back end is a bit of a hybrid with the newer metal plate and an older metal nut, but it works. This little metal chain that allows the shifting to happen is probably the weakest link of the Sturmey-Archer internal gear shifting. If I were to do any sort of long distance riding with this bike, I'd consider having a backup shift chain around. And then I'm using one of these friction shifters for shifting. One of the volunteers at the co-op asked once, "Hey, has anyone ever used a non-indexed friction shifter for an internal gear hub?" and I just stared at him with a look which clearly indicated, yeah, obviously most of my bikes are like that. For more than 3 speeds, it may be less than ideal, but I like this for 3 speeds. Shift lever in line with the handlebar equals middle gear. Pretty easy. I had also upgraded the saddle before last winter, which was a bit disappointing since being outside all of those months caused some damage to a nice velo sprung saddle. So since this bike sits outside all of the time, I've since moved that saddle to another bike and moved a much older velo sprung saddle, which I had fixed up with some black silicone as part of my cheap bike build-off bike. I'll try to do another couple of coats of that soon. And then, as I mentioned in my last video, I got a speck of metal in my eye, kicked up from the ground after an unexpected thunderstorm, and that was a very unpleasant experience. So I put almost full fenders on a day or two later, and I put a couple of fun bolts on it. Then a few days later, I woke up in the middle of the night and decided that this ATB sticker from Bike Breath was perfect for this bike, but was a tad too large. So I close cut it at 4 in the morning, as one does. Then, since I had added some full Klunker fenders, I decided to add a sticker stating as much. But now it needs a couple more stickers. I have 2 different aluminum is not metal stickers from Tim Fitzwater. I think the smaller one makes more sense here. And I have wheel reflectors and a rear reflector on this bike, but I still need a front reflector and pedal reflectors. Time to do that. At least the front reflector. I don't know where my pedal reflectors are right now. To continue with the comparison with the music, most people who are into synthesizers don't tend to think of Korg Volcas and even the Novation circuit as much more than a toy. But although my modular synth setup is likely more interesting to most synth nerds, I never made music as quickly and effortlessly as I did with my Mega setup, where everything was just ready to go. Similarly, some of my other bikes may be what many people would consider to be more interesting, but this humble 3-speed is one of the bikes that I put the most miles on, just because it's an outdoors bike, always locked up outside my apartment, ready to dash down the street or across the city. If you haven't ridden a bike with a coaster brake since you were a kid, I'd recommend it. If you've been thinking of having a coaster brake, but you want more than 1 speed, that's totally possible. On my rally bike, I have a Shimano Nexus 8-speed with coaster brake, and on this one, I have 3 speeds with a coaster brake. I think 3 is just barely enough for most city use, though I would definitely want more gear range for touring. Anyway, let's go use a coaster brake and look at old Sturmey-Archer heads. Hey viewers, what are you riding? Any coaster brake riders amongst you? If you liked this video, please like this video. Bye all.